Have you ever made a decision that felt, I mean, completely flawlessly logical at the time, only to watch it just backfire in the most spectacular way possible?
Oh, absolutely. We all have.
Right. Like you mapped out all the pros and cons, you gathered the data, you felt entirely confident, and then absolute disaster.
Yeah, it's a terrible feeling.
It really is. And if you're listening and nodding right now, you are definitely not alone. It happens to the smartest people all the time. But the really fascinating part, and I guess the good news here, is that these predictable, unforced errors are actually entirely fixable. We just need to upgrade our mental operating system.
And that right there is the core mission for this deep dive. We are exploring 7 specific thinking mistakes that smart people consistently make, and more importantly, how to build a framework to just, avoid them completely.
Exactly. And to do this, we're synthesizing a massive stack of material today. We've got Gabriel Weinberg and Lauren McCann's book, Super Thinking, some reality testing strategies from Decisive, insights on decision fatigue from Forbes, Charlie Munger's famous lattice work of mental models, and some really master-level guides on intelligent decision-making from Farnham Street.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is a ton of ground, yeah.
Yeah.
But the overarching theme that binds all these different sources together is this one concept, the concept of mental models.
Right. And for those who might not be super familiar, think of a mental model as a compression algorithm for reality.
A compression algorithm.
Yeah. The world is just infinitely complex, right? And our brains simply cannot process every single variable in real time. So mental models are tools that compress that massive complexity into manageable, usable chunks.
Making it easier to digest.
Exactly. When you use a concept from physics, like velocity, which tells us that both speed and direction matter, or a psychological principle like reciprocity, you're using a mental model. They basically highlight the key variables of a situation while completely ignoring the noise.
Which is really the ultimate defense against decision fatigue.
Yeah.
Because, we are bombarded with so many choices daily from the moment we wake up that our judgment naturally degrades.
It really does.
So uploading these models into your brain preserves your mental energy for the decisions that actually matter. But that brings us to the first major hurdle, because the very first mistake highly intelligent people make is a fundamental misunderstanding of the tools themselves. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at mistake number 1, confusing the map with the territory.
This trap is universally appealing to smart people. We all know the phrase, the map is not the territory. A map is an abstraction, it has to be. I mean, otherwise, a perfectly accurate map of the world would literally be the size of the world.
Right, which would be completely useless.
Exactly. But in high-stakes environments, we often fall in love with the elegance of our maps, our spreadsheets, our financial projections, our beautifully formatted business plans.
The theoretical stuff.
Yeah. And we forget that they're not the messy, unpredictable reality of the actual territory.
I was actually reading through the Farnham Street Guide, and they use hiring as a brilliant illustration of this. So think about a candidate with an absolute powerhouse resume. They went to all the right schools, they have the prestigious past employers, the formatting is flawless. That resume is the map.
A very compelling map.
Super compelling.
Yeah.
But then you hire them, and they are a complete disaster in the day-to-day reality of the office. Because the territory is messy human dynamics, shifting deadlines, ambiguous goals. The map looked flawless, but it entirely failed to represent the territory.
And why do we cling to the map in that situation? Because it's comfortable, it's clean. If the hire fails, a manager can just point to the resume and say, look, they checked all the boxes on paper, it's not my fault.
It's a defensive mechanism.
Yeah. Absolutely. Engaging with the actual territory requires us to constantly update our internal models based on new, often contradictory information. It requires reconciling what we deeply want to be true with what is actually true. And honestly, that is a psychologically painful process.
It is. But we also can't individually map out every single aspect of reality ourselves, right?
Right.
We have to rely on maps drawn by other people, experts, teachers, algorithms. So how do we avoid this trap without just driving ourselves completely crazy?
You choose your cartographers wisely. You seek out the map makers who are rigorous, who are transparent about their methodology, and most importantly, who openly revise their maps when new data comes in.
Because if they don't revise,
If someone's map never changes despite the territory actively shifting around them, that's a massive red flag.
that plays directly into the ego trap, which is honestly a perfect pivot to mistake number 2. Stepping outside your circle of competence. There's this strange phenomenon where highly successful people assume that their extreme competence in one very specific arena creates this, halo effect that makes them an expert in everything.
Right. Charlie Munger was famous for emphasizing this circle of competence. And his crucial insight wasn't about expanding your circle to be as massive as possible. It was actually about knowing the exact unforgiving boundaries of whatever circle you currently have.
Knowing where your edge is.
Exactly. A brilliant surgeon might be a total genius in the operating room, but that doesn't mean they have the slightest edge when it comes to picking macroeconomic stocks.
Yeah, it's essentially like a seasoned sailor deciding to navigate a completely unfamiliar, treacherous coastline without consulting a local guide. You might know how to sail a boat, but you are at the mercy of hidden reefs and currents you don't even begin to understand. You're operating blind, but tragically, with the false confidence of an expert.
And the danger is always that false confidence. The wisest individuals approach problems by clearly defining where their edge ends. They view the boundary of their competence not as a personal weakness or a flaw, but as a critical survival mechanism.
I look at it this way, saying, I don't know, doesn't mean you stop learning. Venturing out into the unknown is how you grow. But when you are making high-stakes decisions, you have to brutally acknowledge your limitations. Celebrate your actual expertise, sure, but don't let it trick you into playing a game where you have zero advantage.
Which brings us to how we approach the problems that are actually within our circle. Smart people have a severe tendency to commit mistake number 3, overcomplicating the solution.
Oh, this is a big one. There's this assumption that a complex problem absolutely mandates a complex, multi-layered solution. We look at a thorny issue and just start layering on variables, conditions, highly nuanced theories. But the sources keep returning to Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation with the fewest assumptions is usually the best starting point.
To understand why we overcomplicate things, we have to look at 2 specific cognitive traps mentioned in superthinking: the conjunction fallacy and overfitting.
Let's break those down.
Sure, the conjunction fallacy is our tendency to think that a highly specific, detailed narrative is more likely to be true than a broad, simple one.
Give me an example of that.
Well, if someone pitches you a startup and gives you a 10-step, highly specific narrative about exactly how they will corner the market, your brain naturally thinks it sounds incredibly plausible. But mathematically, every single added detail actually decreases the probability that the entire sequence will happen.
Right, because so many more things have to go perfectly right. And overfitting is the data equivalent of that, isn't it? Like when you tune a financial model so perfectly to match the last 10 years in the stock market that it becomes completely useless for predicting tomorrow.
Precisely. It's too complex. It fits the past perfectly, but shatters upon contact with the future.
So what's the fix?
The ultimate antidote to both of those traps is first principles thinking. Instead of reasoning by analogy, doing things a certain way just because that's how they've always been done, you break a complex problem down into its most fundamental, undeniable truths. You strip away all the assumptions and build back up from the absolute bedrock.
The Farnham Street material uses Elon Musk's battery cost analysis as the gold standard for this, and it's fascinating. For years, the auto industry accepted that battery packs would always be incredibly expensive. Historically, they cost around $600 per kilowatt hour.
Which is a huge barrier for electric cars.
Massive barrier. But the industry assumed that was just a fixed reality. That is, reasoning by analogy.
But reasoning from first principles changes the entire landscape, you ask.
Yeah.
What are the fundamental material constituents of a battery? Cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, some polymers, and a steel can.
Just the raw materials.
Just the materials. And if you bought those raw materials on the London Metal Exchange today, what is their actual spot price?
And it turns out to be a tiny fraction of that historical cost. The rest of the cost was just an accumulation of outdated manufacturing assumptions and supply chain inefficiencies. By stripping away the complex narrative and looking only at the fundamental truths of the materials, an entirely new, heavily simplified conclusion became possible.
But there is a crucial friction point here that we need to mention. When we simplify our thinking to solve the immediate problem, we sometimes create a massive blind spot for the future. And that is mistake number 4, first-order thinking.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where the biological wiring of our brains actually works against us. First-order thinking is driven by the immediate feedback loop. We face a problem, we find a solution that satisfies the immediate pain point, and boom, we get a hit of dopamine. We just want the quick win.
Every action has a consequence, but we often forget that every consequence has a subsequent consequence. First-order thinking is inherent short-termism. Second-order thinking forces you to look past that initial dopamine hit and ask the ultimate forcing question. And then what?
Let's use the community event example from the sources because it paints the picture perfectly. Say you're running a local organization and your goal is to boost attendance at your weekly meetings. Your first order thought is pretty obvious. Offer free food.
It's a simple, seemingly brilliant solution.
Right. And the next week, your attendance triples. First order success. But, and then what?
The second-order consequences begin to unfold. You attracted a massive crowd, sure, but they don't actually care about the community initiative. They just want the free lunch. They consume your entire budget.
And the actual community members.
The genuinely engaged community members, who are now drowned out by a room full of people who don't care, get frustrated and they stop coming. Fast forward 6 months, your budget is completely gone, the free food stops, the lunch seekers vanish, and your core audience has abandoned you. The first-order win directly engineered a catastrophic second-order loss.
It's the chess grandmaster analogy. A novice looks at the board and thinks, hey, I can take that pawn right now. The grandmaster doesn't even care about the pawn. She is calculating how capturing that pawn shifts the entire power dynamic of the board. 10 moves into the future. Second-order thinking forces you to play the long game.
There's a brilliant quote in the Weinberg and McCann text that captures this perfectly. It says, "People often overestimate what will happen in the next 2 years and underestimate what will happen in the next 10.
That is so true. We struggle with the 10-year horizon because it requires us to constantly challenge our own assumptions, which segues perfectly into mistake number 5, falling for confirmation bias and the trap of binary thinking.
Confirmation bias is arguably the most dangerous glitch in our mental operating system. We have a deep-seated, often subconscious tendency to seek out, favor, and remember information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs.
While ignoring the rest.
Exactly. Simultaneously, we conveniently dismiss or even aggressively attack any data that contradicts us. It forces us into this rigid, binary thinking. Everything is either a massive success or a total failure. Someone is either entirely right or entirely wrong.
But the sources introduce a really powerful counter-strategy to this called thinking gray. Instead of rushing to a black or white conclusion just to relieve the psychological tension of uncertainty, because uncertainty is uncomfortable, you intentionally hold the issue in a gray area.
There is a great quote from Stephen Sample included in the material on this. He says, "The essence of thinking gray is this. Don't form an opinion about an important matter until you've heard all the relevant facts and arguments, or until circumstances force you to form an opinion without recourse to all the facts."
I read that quote and immediately thought, wow, that sounds exhausting. I mean, in modern business or just modern life, everyone demands an instant opinion. If you don't have a hot take ready to go, you're seen as uninformed. How do you actually practice thinking gray when the pressure to decide is so intense?
Well, you don't use it for deciding what to eat for lunch. You reserve it strictly for the high-stakes decisions. And a highly practical way to enforce this habit is to actively play devil's advocate with your own deeply held ideas.
The book Decisive focuses heavily on reality testing your assumptions.
Right.
Yes. Before you commit capital or resources to a project you love, force yourself to argue the exact opposite case. Set a tripwire, a specific metric or condition that, if triggered, proves your initial assumption was wrong. It ensures you aren't just looking in the mirror admiring how smart your original idea was. And if you fail to reality test those assumptions, you inevitably fall into mistake number 6. Treating the symptom, not the disease. We see this everywhere. We put a superficial Band-Aid on a gaping wound because we fail to distinguish between the proximate cause, the immediate obvious issue right in front of our face, and the root cause, which is the systemic underlying disease.
The superthinking notes bring up a rigorous postmortem technique to combat this, known as the 5 whys. When a failure occurs, the natural human instinct is to fix the immediate error, assign blame, and move on as quickly as possible.
Just make the pain go away.
Right. But the 5 whys forces you to stop and ask, why did that happen? And whatever the answer is, you ask, why did that happen? You refuse to accept the superficial answer.
Let's run a hypothetical on this to show how it works. Imagine a critical software update fails and completely crashes a company's internal system. The proximate cause is clear. A developer pushed a buggy line of code. First order thinking says, fire the developer or just patch the code and move on. But let's apply the 5 whys. Why did the buggy code bring down the system?
Because it wasn't caught during testing.
Okay, why wasn't it caught during testing?
Because the testing server was offline during the deployment window.
Interesting. Why was the testing server offline?
Because the automated server maintenance schedule conflicts with the weekly software release schedule.
Why do they conflict?
Because the engineering team and the IT infrastructure team don't share a unified calendar or communicate their deployment cadences.
And there it is. We just went from a single developer making a typo to a systemic cross-departmental communication failure. If you just fired the developer and patched the code, the exact same system crash would happen again next month with a completely different developer.
Exactly. And the number 5 is just an arbitrary target. The goal is simply to keep drilling down until you hit the bedrock of the problem. If you only ever treat the proximate cause, the root cause survives and will simply manifest as a totally different symptom down the line.
We have covered incredible ground here, diving deep into complexity, biases, and root causes. But the sources offer one final, truly contrarian insight that completely flips how smart people usually operate. Let's look at mistake number 7, only planning for success.
It sounds incredibly counterintuitive, doesn't it? Business schools, self-help books, executive coaches, they all teach us to vividly visualize success. You gather your team in a room and ask, how do we make this launch a massive, unprecedented triumph?
Which is actually a massive blind spot. Brainstorming for pure success is often ambiguous and stressful. What if we took the complete opposite approach? What if you gathered that same team and asked, how could we absolutely guarantee that this project is a miserable, catastrophic failure?
This is the mental model of inversion, or inverse thinking. Approaching a problem backward often illuminates critical vulnerabilities that are entirely invisible when you are only looking forward.
The sources offer a brilliantly relatable example of this: planning a vacation. Normally, you sit down with your family and dream about all the peak experiences you want to have. You plan for absolute success. But if you apply inversion, you ask, what specific things would absolutely ruin this trip?
Forgetting your passports would ruin it.
Misjudging the climate and packing entirely the wrong clothes would ruin it.
Getting severe food poisoning would definitely ruin it.
By actively identifying exactly what guarantees failure, you naturally generate a concrete, actionable checklist of pitfalls to avoid.
Avoiding stupidity is often much easier and far more effective than trying to engineer unadulterated brilliance. By removing the barriers to success and mitigating the fatal risks, you often ensure a better outcome than if you had just aggressively pushed on the accelerator. Inversion is a remarkably powerful tool for stress testing any plan.
Let's bring all of this together. We've synthesized a tremendous amount of insight from these sources today. If there is a short summary to extract, it's that you cannot do everything, and your brain cannot process everything. Gabriel Weinberg includes a fantastic proverb in his book: if you chase two rabbits, both will escape. You have to focus.
So what does this all mean? Upgrading your mental operating system with these models allows you to stop chasing the wrong rabbits. It is about intentionally shaping how you interact with information. You acknowledge that your maps are not the territory, and you update them when reality demands it.
You define the strict boundaries of your circle of competence.
You cut through complexity using first principles. You anticipate the future by demanding to know the second-order consequences.
You hold the tension of thinking gray to defeat your own confirmation bias.
You dig to the bedrock with the 5 whys. And you use inversion to systematically dismantle the paths to failure.
These aren't just academic thought experiments. They are the practical filters you need to combat the decision fatigue we talked about at the very beginning. You don't have to evaluate every single crisis or opportunity from scratch anymore. You have a framework. It cuts through the overwhelming noise of the modern world and preserves your intellect for the moments that truly require it.
It is the ultimate shortcut to remaining well-informed and fiercely effective without burning out your cognitive engine.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. Throughout this entire deep dive, we have focused exclusively inward. We've talked about using these mental models to debug your own thinking mistakes, to reality test your own assumptions, and to find your own root causes. But consider the outward application.
Think about the biggest rival in your industry, a notoriously difficult colleague, or a public figure you vehemently fundamentally disagree with.
What if you use the 5 whys to genuinely try and uncover the root cause of their deeply held beliefs? What if you used second-order thinking to anticipate the long-term consequences they might be aiming for, rather than just judging their immediate actions?
What if you tried, with total intellectual honesty, to draw the map of the territory exactly as they see it, complete with their biases and their circle of competence?
It is a profoundly uncomfortable exercise, but if you can rigorously map out their perspective using these models, without endorsing it, just understanding it, it could completely revolutionize how you negotiate, interact, and navigate the territory alongside them.
Knowledge is always most potent when it challenges our default settings.
Absolutely. Keep updating those maps, stay fiercely curious about the territory, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.